All right, I'd like to have welcome everybody joining today the August 7th edition of Noisy Reality. We're going to be looking at the midterms, domestic politics, uh, lots of juicy stuff to talk about. The Blanche affair. I mean, it's always mind-boggling the things to talk about. But we're very happy here to have with us Professor Shawn Donahue of the University of Buffalo, Professor of Political Science, and Jeffrey Gold of the Working Families Party. I'm joined here with Alex Stavropoulos and Gail Aronow, and thank you both for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
All right, well, let's start with Shawn. We're going to repeat this again, Shawn. What stands out to you as the most significant political event coming out of these primaries this week?
Well, the race that I think that we've all been kind of eagerly anticipating how it was going to come out was the Michigan Senate primary. So Senator Gary Peters, kind of surprised, I think, a few people deciding not to run for a third term because, for at least for senators, he's a youngster, which that means you're in your 60s. Um, Kind of a funny thing is I had my uncle's I went to my uncle's 90th birthday on Sunday, and I joked with him that he's the perfect age to run for the Senate now, um, given some of our older members. But it was an open seat, and there were a number of Democrats that it seemed like maybe could have cleared the field here. um, Gretchen Whitmer almost certainly would have, possibly Pete Buttigieg, maybe Attorney General Dana Nessel, but none of them ended up running. So you ended up with kind of this three-way race between Haley Stevens, a congresswoman. Initially, she won a Republican-leaning district in the Detroit suburbs. Then, with redistricting, she ended up defeating actually another member of Congress who kind of got double bunked with her, Congressman Levin, in basically an Oakland County seat in the suburbs that was heavily Democratic. So she was kind of the support, she had the support of kind of the Democratic establishment in Washington. And later she picked up a number of important endorsements, including Governor Whitmer. And then you kind of had on the other lane Dr. Abdul El Sayed, who had ran for governor in 2018 and was defeated by over 20 points by Gretchen Whitmer in that election. And then so I kind of saw this race with State Senator Mallory McBorough in the middle. It was kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I mean, she was trying to be the one that was in between kind of the more moderate candidate and the more, what do you call it, very progressive candidate. And it seemed like she had a lot of potential, but it didn't really work out, and she dropped out, and you ended up with a one-on-one race between Stevens and Al Said. I think that the biggest loser in this race were pollsters. That you were seeing poll after poll that was showing him not only up double digits, but some of them were kind of like in the high teens. And clearly, what happened here is that it was a race decided by slightly less than 1% of the vote. And I think it's interesting the coalitions that the two candidates put together. So some people kind of liken this race maybe to Bernie against Hillary in 2016 because it had a similar margin. Um, the difference is that the coalition that if you looked at the map that Bernie put together in 2016 versus El Said, they look a little bit different. And the coalition that put El Said over the top was that in some of the areas with a large Arab and Muslim population, so Dearborn Heights, Hamtramck, he really ran up the score there. I think that was expected. And he also did well among more college-educated white Democrats. So I think the most interesting statistic I saw is that I expected that his best county would be Washtenaw County. That's where he lives. That's where Ann Arbor is, University of Michigan. It turns out that he actually did slightly better in Kent County, which is where Grand Rapids is. So, for some of us that are older, maybe older than me, we probably think of, oh, Grand Rapids, that's Gerald Ford country. Well, Grand Rapids has changed a lot.
I think of cornflakes when I hear Grand Rapids. Go on.
Battle
yeah,
Creek.
Battle Creek. Right, there you go, Battle Creek.
yeah, yeah. So clearly, Dr. Al Said was building that coalition of a lot of wealthier, more highly educated white voters. So I think an interesting statistic is if you look at the 15 counties that had the highest percentage of college educated voters, he won 13 of them.
Mm.
If you look at the 15 counties that had the lowest percentage of college educated voters, Stevens won all 15. So I think that what we kind of expected coming out of this um, would be that it showed some division in the party there. But kind of what we've seen is that at least at the leader level, so Haley Stevens pretty quickly endorsed El Said. So I think that the interesting thing will be what do her voters do? Um, because I think that one thing that may really help Dr. El Said in the general election is that he showed a lot of weakness with African American voters. Now, are they likely to vote for the Republican Mike Rogers? No. I think that the worry is they stay home or skip the race. Because, does he, it's one of those things, do you get like 90%? Do you get 80%? That could make a big difference. But one big thing in Michigan is it's one of the few states that has a straight ticket option left. So it means that you can vote for a candidate and you can vote that straight party and it just covers everybody.
Mm.
So you don't actually have to mark the individual name. But what we have here, I think, is something that is that's a natural experiment that's in process. Is that we have a clearly further left progressive candidate that is running on those issues in a purple state. A state that voted for Trump, Biden, Trump. So a lot of progressives have long said that, we can win anywhere, give us the chance. Now they have the chance. So it has a lot of potential how this race will come out in November for 2028. Because if Dr. El Said wins, the more progressive candidates in the race will say, hey, he ran in Michigan, one of the ultimate swing states, and he won. That means that okay, we could carry Pennsylvania, we could carry Michigan, we could carry Wisconsin. But if he loses, especially if it's a loss that means Democrats don't control the Senate, you're going to hear the longest "I told you so" in the history of politics.
Yeah, right. Now we just saw Carville, who, um, basically it sort of amuses me with listening to Carville because he tends to forget his famous phrase, "It's the economy, stupid," and clearly that's what's motivating some of this unrest in both the Republican and Democratic Party. But Jeffrey, what's your take on what happened in Michigan?
Well, I met Dr. Al Said 8 years ago when he ran for governor of Michigan, and he's incredibly impressive. Now, impressing me, and Professor Donahue is spot on in his analysis, is irrelevant. The one thing I've learned about being hip deep in politics, including running canvases, is that nobody, not my closest relatives and friends, view the world the same way I do. So, assuming that, if he can manage to run this general election on health care, if the recent Supreme Court case allowing even more coordination and at the end of the day, dark money doesn't flood out any other positive messaging. And he's certainly well placed to address Michigan's other underlying economic problems. For instance, the war made on the Canadian economy directly impacts the Great Lakes auto and auto parts complex. They're hurting a lot. And even though Trump talks about bringing jobs back, often those jobs in auto and auto related industries don't necessarily come back to unionized Michigan. People I knew who were canvassing, and I think Al Said's canvass operation was extremely impressive and 8 years in the making, but not statewide, but certainly he's been thinking about it a long time, and I know people on his campaign that have a lot of on-the-ground experience. I asked for feedback from the redder parts of Michigan and places like Kalamazoo and the Upper Peninsula and Midland, and they had way more people out in those places than I would have guessed, which was interesting. And I'm trying to coordinate, I'm trying to look at the results on the ground by election district and more precinct. I haven't even seen every final stat, but it'll be interesting to see if they could penetrate some of those more and move more troops and more volunteers there. Um, I'm also interested in the role of the Black church. I knew Marianne Mahaffey, who was the city council president of Detroit. I'm mourning her daughter, Susan Dua, a great leader in Michigan and New York today. And I remember campaigning around Michigan with Marianne in Detroit and those other few Michigan cities where there's a significant Black populations, including Benton Harbor. So if he can further speak to those people. I don't know that he can. That would be helpful. Um, the other part of it is Michigan's dealing with the crisis of localities. They have more localities in some ways than little New Jersey, that is 580 for a small state. So they're struggling. A lot of their localities are expected to do a lot, and they're struggling. The federal government just cut more billions in transportation money, and Michigan is in the top 12 states losing money, California being, I think, 1.2 billion, New York, 850 million, but Michigan's going to lose 200 or $300 million. And then this week, I'll call it the deregulation or attack on Head Start. So between now and November, there's a lot happening, and then there's the war and oil prices.
Okay. Now, one thing that did occur was I know the Times had an article where Schumer was talking to Said, and basically Schumer said, "Look, it may not like me, but as long as you vote, win. That's the key thing we're interested in." Um, and then you have accompanying this the glee of some in the Republican Party because Said is sort of to be their poster child. There's, oh my God, we've got this genuine commie that we can attack. And I'm wondering, Shawn, your response, and I'm going to ask other people if they want to chime in with questions too, on this issue of Michigan. But how do you view all this Red Scare stuff coming up?
Well, you know, the one thing is that I think that a lot of the people that are throwing around a lot of these terms, maybe we don't know what they are, to be honest. But I mean, one of the things that we have seen in politics is that Democrats try to make the Republicans the face of some of their most extreme people. Um, Same thing, Republicans try to make some of the more extreme people in the Democratic Party the face of their party. And it seems like that Republicans have had more success than Democrats have, I think, in the last 10 years with doing that. Um, but I think that, like I said, what we're seeing is that, you're seeing the race that people, really the progressives, had been wanting for a while, give us the chance in a purple state. But I mean, I think that what they're going to try to do is, when you have somebody that has not held office, it tends to be that you're going to go after more of, past statements, past tweets and things versus somebody that's had more of a record and has been in office. So clearly, one of the places that Republicans are really going to try to tie Dr. El Sayed to is Hassan Piker, who has made a lot of very extremely controversial statements.
Tell the audience
Um,
who Hassan Piker is.
well, he is a streamer. Um, he has a streaming program. I mean, I think he's on for, I'm not a listener, but I understand that he's on for hours and hours and hours and hours.
Mm.
Well, the thing is, if you're on for hours and hours and hours and it's on tape, you're probably going to find some stuff that is not going to go over well with the middle of the road voters. So the one that Republicans are definitely trying to tie him to, and we can talk about what context it was in. There is a clip of him saying the U.S. basically deserved 9/11. Um, and I think that we can see what is not that subtle, um, tying that to Dr. El Sayed.
Mm.
Um, I think you can tell from his name what the context is. And I think that, Republicans, I think, have been wanting to run against a candidate like this because, I mean, if you just think about a lot of the people they don't like, um, a lot of it is embodied in Dr. El Said there. Aside from maybe his positions on the issues, but who he is. Um, Kind of that's the way I'm kind of looking at it there. And the question is, what will work, what will not work? Because, I mean, one problem I think that Republicans have had in special elections, we saw this in 2025 as well, in those general elections, they've been having trouble getting their people out to vote at the same rate as Democrats. So can they convince somebody in, rural Michigan, that maybe isn't too happy with Trump right now? They're not the people that had Trump signs. They thought that he was going to be better on the economy. Um, they think the Democratic Party, they're not so sure about them. Um, can they make it where the attacks on him get those people out to vote?
Mm.
Because really the biggest thing that El Said has going for him this year is the same thing that Democrats around the country do. And that is, depending on which polls you look at, Donald Trump's approval ratings are somewhere in the low 30s to maybe at best the high 30s. So nationally. So you'd have to think that probably his approval rating in Michigan. I mean, the one problem is we haven't seen a lot of high quality polling for the general election yet. I'm thinking we probably see some in the next week or two come out from some of the better pollsters. Um, but I would have to think that Donald Trump's approval rating in Michigan is probably 40% or less.
Mm.
So, and the question is, who turns out? Because the problem for Mike Rogers is that is he able to try to separate himself from Trump? I mean, he was just at a rally with him. The problem that he would have, and the good thing for Dr. El Said is that it means that Mike Rogers has to get votes of people that disapprove of Trump.
Mm.
The challenge for El Said is to keep all those people voting for him that disapprove of Trump.
Right. Jeffrey,
So I mean, if I'm so one last thing.
no,
So
go on,
if
Sean.
I'm so the last thing I was going to close before we get to Jeffrey is if I am Dr. El Said, the person I want to run against is not Mike Rogers. It's Donald J. Trump.
Right. No, that's
That's
interesting.
his ace.
Go on, Sean. All right.
No, no, that's all I have.
Okay. Now, one thing about this that's interesting, and your take on this Red Scare stuff, Jeffrey, is also the fact that Saeed was hit with a large money coming from APAC to basically derail him. And now I saw they were deciding whether they want to go back into this again. Although I have a feeling that they're going to be able to draw along the lines of what Shawn was saying from super PACs to go after Saeed. But what's your take on all the Red Scare stuff and how this is starting to come in as a factor or not a factor in the race?
Well, Sean's point about othering Al Said is certainly primary. And one of the reasons I was going on about on the ground in the redder parts of Michigan is, the job now is to build some structure there of locals if you can. It's very late in the day. We have less than 90 days to go. I'm not sure that can be done. And as you mentioned, Jim, does APAC have to do all the dirty work? It's interesting to me because I'm in touch with Jews for Abdul. Again, I never extend too much from people I know, but there was, it wasn't a Niagara, but there was a Jewish vote for Al Said, and people are recruiting from that community also. So some of it is up to them in certain parts of Michigan, particularly Oakland County. Um, and I don't know that we're going to get Bloomfield Hills around Detroit, but APAC has to run the whole table if they want to really focus on that. The reason that there's so many people focused on Michigan in my community was that we're still saying remember Andy Levin, right? He was the APAC example they made years ago and removed him from office, and he was a guy that pretty well did what was standard in those days for liberal Democrats as it related to aid to the state of Israel. And I'm not as left as a lot of people. I think there has to be a Jewish lifeboat state. And, it seems ridiculous to talk about modular federalism after Gaza, but, there is discomfort even within the Jewish community, not just progressive in Michigan as we address this subject. But, so I'm also focusing on my own ethnic group and how they might be mobilized. I don't know if it'll be determinative because I still think, as Shawn said, you've got to win. Michiganders are the only ones that can hold up their hand and tell you where they are. And everyone I know in the campaign now are focusing on reddish and purplish areas outside the big cities too. So can they build a quick canvas operation? I don't know. I'm sorry to sound so comme ci, comme ça.
All
And
right.
there are other things going on that might allow APAC to concentrate resources. They're messing with gerrymandering to get rid of the one remaining House seat in Missouri, which is not a priority of APAC. They haven't seemed to demonize the mayor of New York City, but I'm not extrapolating from New York City. It's a semi-unique place. The one thing we take away from all of this is how good is your canvas operation? We go back to plain vanilla door knocking. Can there be enough people doing that? And will it get overwhelmed by uh, the coordinated campaigns now and the secretive stuff? And exactly what Shawn mentioned, the othering and the othering of other candidates. It was interesting to see who else won in Michigan, in Conyers' old seat or roughly his old seat. Some of the other wins. Um, But Schumer's point, to your point about Chuck Schumer saying we've got to make peace, we got to get through this together. Um, I hope he's right about that. But he doesn't have a lot of currency either with activists or uh, those that are critical of APAC.
Yeah, no, Schumer's vulnerable. Go on, Alex.
Yeah. I just wondered, Jeff, did you or Shawn, have you guys read Ted Ham's book on the Mamdani election? Because it has a lot of interest, I think, pertinent details. It's called Meet Mayor Mamdani. He had done an earlier version for Run Zoran Run that happened before the general election. But again, because he has some interesting points about I don't think in terms of El Sayed about the mobilization kind of for well in the case of Mayor Mamdani South Asians in New York City for like that they had been kind of politically like a lot of immigrant groups they hadn't been politically involved, and of course seeing one of their own running for major office, that was one of the things that kind of drove both in terms of obviously South Asians volunteering for him, but also simply them voting as a block essentially for him. And looking at the Times article that I guess was like a day or two ago on they went into the specifics of where yeah like kind of you guys were talking. They talked about college towns voting for Mamdani, but they also talked about Arab Americans voting obviously Dearborn and so on. So I just wonder, yeah, digging into the weeds there, what do you think? Yeah, mobilizing those and pointing out that again, the uncommitted movement, the same people who voted that way in the 2024 primary against Biden and Harris, to stay out. That those people again were similarly mobilized by El Sayed. So yes, I wonder what you think about yeah that kind of new demographic group in Michigan as a voting bloc and so on,
Yeah, go on,
and
Sean.
how yeah they can be further mobilized for the general election.
Your thoughts, Sean?
Well, I think there's one thing that we should that kind of speaking as a social scientist, um, often you'll see, not often, but sometimes what you'll see in kind of some experiments and polling is to ask people what percentage certain groups are in the country. And one of the things that you always see is that groups are very that are not that big. Um, the overall opinion is like you ask people like what percentage of the country is Muslim or Jewish or Catholic, and it's like this much for Catholics, and oh, it's that much. I think that that we should be looking at, I'm just thinking that there were, I think, about 5.5 million votes cast in 2024 in Michigan. So, it's a midterm election, so you're probably not going to have that many. I think that we should look and see, I mean, actually, how many people are citizens of voting age that fit in that category? And you're probably not talking about an incredibly large amount. Maybe you're talking about 100, 120,000. I mean, I haven't looked at the exact number. I mean, I actually did look up how many Jews there were in Michigan, and it's like about 130,000. Clearly, some of those are children and they can't vote. But the one thing is that it kind of depends on how close the election is. If 100,000 voted last time and you raise that to 130,000, then it can have a big effect. But I mean, I think that just kind of looking at the primary, Democrats had a really good turnout there, about 1.5 million Democrats. But Kamala Harris got like 2.7 million
Mhm.
votes in the state. So it's still less than what she got. So you're talking still, primary electorate is smaller, and it is generally more ideological towards a more liberal Democratic candidate or a more conservative Republican candidate. Um, and actually, the thing that we generally see is that the smaller the turnout, that tends to be better for the more ideological candidate. Hence why, if you looked in the past, I mean, look at 2016, the places that Bernie did the best and the places where Ted Cruz did the best in those primaries, caucus states.
Right.
Which the thing that's interesting, we saw in 2020, is that some of the reforms that were done after the 2016 campaign, where the Bernie people really wanted to, do away with the super delegates. But the thing that the more moderate Democrats got that actually ended up being much, 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 I could keep saying much, was it got rid of most of the caucuses,
Mm.
and they were replaced by primaries. So, you looked at some of the numbers that, for instance, Bernie was getting in caucus states in
Yeah.
2016 that switched over to primaries. The delta between those two numbers was enormous.
Mhm.
Interesting. Jeff, you want to add to that?
Not much. I was just talking to people in rural Michigan. I mean, I'm trying to figure out if the electorate that Shawn rightly mentions in November will be substantially younger. I've been particularly calling around to people in Michigan, just using that state, who are in parts of the state that have been impacted by tariffs where employment is down. But would they peel from Trump or a Trump candidate, a joined at the hip Trump U.S. Senate candidate? It's hard now for me to see that happening within 90 days unless there's an absolute miracle in the on the ground canvas, and or the election can be so nationalized, and the way the Republicans and the right are better at doing that on issues with another spike in gas prices, or those people on the cusp, and Shawn would be better placed to address them too, who are getting more uncomfortable with some of Trump's cash grabs. I'll put it that way. There is a discomfort. It's getting so outrageous. And it's depressing today that Bill Cassidy, who has a medical degree and once voted for Michael Dukakis and once ran Louisiana, the senator from Louisiana outgoing, went with the Todd Blanche uh, nomination. So, there may be people that just think, well, and again, how do we get them out? Will they come out? I'm not sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
And what about, college students as a vote? Because again, the Times played them up as a very important Alcides win. That, he won Ann Arbor and so on. Um,
Um, I don't know if that's enough to move the whole state, but I've spent time at Kalamazoo College.
Oh.
And I know organizers there are trying to organize the area around that. Um,
Well, I mean, one thing that we have to be thinking about too, as far as college students, is that we're still on summer break. Um, my university starts on the 24th of August. I know different schools have different times that they start. Once like Western Michigan, Eastern Michigan, University of Michigan, Michigan State, um, Northern Michigan. I think I've gotten all the. I don't think is there a Southern Michigan?
no.
It'd probably be Indiana, but it
Wayne
gives
State
you,
in Detroit, which is a great
yeah,
place.
yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of Grand Valley University. I was thinking
Yes,
that's
Grand Valley.
yeah. So what I'm trying to get at is that as far as college students, they vary in ages. Freshmen coming in are generally about 18. Um, have they been registered to vote yet? So. That's going to be a big thing in September, and I'm not sure when the registration deadline in Michigan is to get them actually registered to vote to start with. Uh,
One of Al
because
Saeed's senior staffers was very focused on that. We discussed that 8 years ago when he ran for governor. So, one assumes that they're cognizant of that and the registration. I know I've done a lot of on-campus registration as stu in the spring, the semester before, but we have somewhat more sophisticated technology now to track students because we either try and get them to register on their campus or in their hometown. The question is, where are they on any given election day? As Shawn knows, who teaches them, it's so frustrating. And I've had so many, including in the Midwest when I've canvassed, so many experiences where we just missed the student, or they just went home, or they had to tend a parent, or the parent tells you, oh, they went back to school. I tried to get them to vote. So getting that, and by the way, Zoran Mamdani had a really good database of that information. So um, if outside and company want to win, you know, they have to be thinking about that, and I know they are.
yeah, and another thing to keep in mind, if you actually look at age cohorts, the difference between men and women, how they're voting, you see the largest gap with young voters,
Hmm.
18 to 29. And the thing that we have to remember is that Trump had, an enormous surge among young men in 2024. But what we're seeing in polling is that his biggest drops since then in his approval rating have been among those young men.
Hmm.
We've also seen, it's not as big of an issue in Michigan. It would be if we're talking about some other Senate races like in Texas. But the other group that he has seen the bottom fall out with are Latino voters.
Okay, very good point. Now,
I just want to make one other Michigan. I don't want to sound too economistic, but there was a little uptick in the sales, even though the job news today was bad. We're down 23,000 jobs. Some people think that's seasonal or relates to summer, etc. But some economists, but there was a little uptake in the sales of SUVs, which is the only thing really our motor industry domestically still makes and makes in some parts around Michigan. So that was kind of interesting. I'm not sure it's going to be determinative in all in the November election.
all right, let me shift to something that Jeffrey raised, and that is this whole issue of Blanche and this whole Attorney General nomination. Uh, what's your sense of this, Shawn, with this issue being argued right now in terms of him? I guess he's sort of at this point with Cassidy's vote, he's guaranteed to pass the Senate. But what about the issues of the slush fund to pay off all the January 6 people, and then of course this IRS compromise? What are those issues, Shawn?
Well, I mean, he said that it's dead, but I mean, I don't know how
Believe
much
it. Yeah.
we can really believe that. I mean, because the thing is that there's actually another fund that you can pay people for federal tort claims. I mean, you didn't really even need this. I mean, it was just it was an extra pot of money to be used, and of course, you were going to have this board of 5 members, I think, that would be appointed by the Attorney General. who kind of used to be Trump's personal lawyer. Um, but I mean, the thing is, there are actually still some lawsuits out there because one of the things is that whenever I teach some of my common law classes, the thing I tell the students is that federal courts are only supposed to hear cases and controversies. You're not supposed to have collusive lawsuits. So there actually have to be two people or organizations or whomever in the lawsuit that have adverse interests. And a federal court have found that basically there's no adverse interest here. It's basically Trump suing the federal government, which he's in charge of. So, but the other thing is on the senators voting for Blanche, that does not surprise me a bit. Whenever I heard some people say, "Oh, he's in trouble, he's in trouble," I mean, what we have seen is that you know Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski are going to vote against them. But one of the things, going back to Chuck Schumer, and Harry Reid often would say about Susan Collins is that we always had her vote when we didn't need it. So you kind of wonder, like, if one of them would have said no, would somebody else have changed their vote, to get to 50-49 because we haven't seen Mitch McConnell for a while, which is probably another story there. But I mean, what it seems like, you'd have to analyze some of these folks, but I think it was interesting. I can't remember if it was Tillis or Corn. It might have been both of them. They were always saying we were always looking for a way to get to yes.
Yep.
Maybe it's they want to be maybe they want to be a lobbyist or something, after they leave the Senate. I mean,
Absolutely.
though the thing is, John Cornyn's 75. I mean, he's got multiple pensions. I'm sure he's doing pretty well. I mean, you kind of wonder, well, you know, you the guy endorsed Ken Paxton and absolutely humiliated him in that primary. I mean, Cassidy was absolutely humiliated in his primary, even worse, where he didn't even make the runoff. And still,
And
they find a
Cassidy's
way.
68, but I was the only thing I could think of. It's hard to get into their heads. He's 68. I guess maybe he wants consulting fees. I always think, and I may have mentioned Charles Grassley in his 90s in Iowa, who's been in politics, I think, since the 1960s at the state level, if I'm not mistaken.
50s.
In the 50s, I stand corrected, Professor. And then you say, well, what does he need out of them? Is he afraid of being, taken out? I mean, what is his? But uh, these were all people that had criticized Trump in past times, and um, but I wonder too. It's the cash grab. I'm back to this. Can the Democrats, can the various factions of the Democrats nationalize the election in a way to say, look, this is a cash grab. Trump doesn't care about you. He's cutting everything you need. He just eliminated the kind of weak tea but important subsidy for Medicare drugs, right? And says, always says it's the state's problem. Now we have an attack on one of the most successful programs, Head Start. Now maybe the average voter is not going to focus on that much, but then you can say he doesn't care about me. He's probably playing the oil's future market. He doesn't care if Hormuz is still closed. He's given our strategic arsenal away with no plan. We're now in another endless war. Full stop. Let's talk about that, right? He's not there for you, and the economy stinks. For some people, that's the other problem. The economy is sectors of the economy are not doing that terribly. Others are. Others are struggling. And it depends where you sit in that.
Well, and the market is doing well for those who are benefiting from it. But let me bring in Aaron. Aaron, go on, Aaron.
No, thank you. Can you hear me?
We got
Okay.
you.
Sure, thanks. Thank you for a great discussion and breakdown. I'm wondering just your perspective on Mike Rogers, because he tends to be this, you see this in politics and different each party, but one of these hard runners in a state, right? Like he's just going to grind his way till he wins. It's almost like the Terminator. Um, and in the last election, or the last time he ran for Senate, which was the last election, he got 2 point 2.69 million votes. And obviously Suckin got 2.7, and that was obviously a presidential year, so that number is going to drop down. I put some links in the chat. 2018, I think, was 4.3 million votes in an off year. It seems. What's your perspective on what you think the numbers might land? It's obviously a higher energy election. So is that going to go up to 5 million, 4.8 million? And how much of that 2.6 million do you think, or 2.6, 2.7 million, can Rogers hold on to? Because if he can hold on to, you know, 2.4 million, and he's obviously going to win. If he can't get 2 million, he's obviously going to lose. That's kind of how I'm looking at it. So to me, it's sort of sandwiched somewhere in that zone there. That's from my absolutely amateur, just reading Charlie Cook and Larry Sabato over the years, and you guys are professionals. But what's your perspective on what you think Rogers can realistically get? Independent of all of the rigor around Dr. Saeed and so on, but just what are his actual internals? Because isn't that going to determine basically if he can win the seat or not? And if Abdul has a strong enough get out the vote effort, then he can just overwhelm Rogers in a change year. That's how I'm seeing it. I don't mean, maybe I'm seeing it completely wrong, but you guys tell me. That's kind of my question and perspective.
Well, I think that one of the things you have to realize in 2024, one of the reasons Democrats have 47 seats in the Senate versus, let's say, having, trying to count here, 44 or 43, is that it seemed like there were a number of Trump voters that just went in and voted for Trump. Um, because, what you were seeing was that not necessarily the Democrats that were winning in states like Nevada and Wisconsin and Michigan were getting more votes than Kamala Harris. It seemed like that the number that Trump got versus the number that the Republican candidate like Rogers got, it just dropped off quite a bit there. But that being said, I mean, I think it depends on which Mike Rogers voters see. I mean, do they see the Mike Rogers that was the FBI agent? He was the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, kind of well-respected foreign policy person kind of in Washington. Or are they looking at the guy that's standing next to Trump? If Rogers can but the thing is, he kind of has to be with Trump, which is kind of a weird thing, even though Trump is very unpopular around the country. He's what brings Republicans out to vote. I mean, but the thing that we've seen in the Trump era is that when Trump's on the ballot, the Trump people come out to vote for him. When he's not, a significant amount drop off. So it's kind of a tricky dance there for Rogers. And I think that the other thing is kind of on the turnout issue. Um, like I said, I think that what he'd have to worry about with the Black community is not necessarily African Americans voting for Rogers. I don't think that you're going to see a whole lot of that. I mean, there are a small percentage of African Americans that do vote Republican, but it's pretty small. I think that what he has to worry about much more is whether they turn out to vote or potentially skip his race. That's where I was bringing in the straight party voting. So it's kind of an interesting mix, kind of how the turnout in Michigan will be.
Now, do you see a quick follow-up? Do you see the usual whenever one party has a candidate who's, let's just say, very aggressive in a primary with what they've said, and now they go general and they are stuck with what they said? Do you see this sort of full court press supporting Dr. Saeed in terms of, the Wes Moores and all the sort of check boxes to say, hey, he's good with Black people, Jewish people, other people, whatever the bucket is that his let's just say his robust language wasn't good with in the primary, and that Stevens was able to take advantage of to weaken him, or at least to make it a very close race. Do you see that full court press kind of really the Democratic Party really getting behind it? And with 90 days to go, do you think that makes a difference?
Well, so far we have seen that. As far as, statements and things that have been made since the election. I mean, I think that one of the things is that I mean, I can say that I'm so and so, and I'm all behind this person, but how much do I do in the next 3 months
Exactly.
behind that?
Yeah, I mean
And
that's what I'm saying. Does Wes Moore come there? Do people put their political capital show up to black churches week in and week out from the American Democratic political black left and really invest in this candidate to try to have him push over the line, or do they use that capital in other elections that like example being Georgia or somewhere else where that could make a I'd say a safe, guaranteed sort of benefit,
well, I think
or
you
North
might need
Carolina for that matter with Cooper.
yeah,
You know.
yeah, it's actually pronounced Cupper.
Oh yeah, I know. You're right. You're right. It
Yeah,
is
it's because it's
Cooper.
an Eastern
Yes,
North Carolina thing.
you're right.
But
100%.
I think you might be missing the most important African American that could get involved in this race that really
Obama.
could make a difference, and that's Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And I guess to maybe Michelle Obama, I guess they're kind of a package there. I mean, I think the other person that if you're interested in trying to get black churchgoers to turn out to vote is Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock from Georgia. Would be an important person to come in there and try to turn out that vote. Because, like I said, they're not like it's not where you're talking about swing voters or more independent, middle of the road people that might be on the fence between who they're going to vote for. Often, what we see is that important demographic that people miss are the people that are undecided on voting and not voting.
Yep. Yep.
Jeffrey,
Absolutely.
you
Thank you.
want to jump in with any comments on these issues? Jeff?
I just was noticing that Pete Buttigieg, Hoosier turned Michigander, went out campaigning after Tuesday for Democrats, I guess, generally. I don't know which constituency that helps much, but can't hurt, I guess, with some people. Maybe the LGBTQIA community, but they would vote for I'll say it anyway. I can't better again what Shawn said. It's getting people out the door is the most challenging thing, and getting younger people out the door uh, is the project, among other things.
Hmm.
I'm also, the UAW has a role in this also in terms of mobilization. Obviously, I've been talking to unions in Michigan about their mobilization plans, including outside major cities. So some of them sound pretty strategic in terms of the low propensity voters or I hope I'm characterizing that group correctly, Shawn,
Yeah.
that they must get to overcome Rogers. I also was curious, if Trump goes to Michigan, it's a danger. His core might come out, and that might help in particularly redder parts of Michigan, less urban parts of Michigan. And on the other hand, he could do one of his Il Duce speeches that goes on 2 hours and fall asleep. These days, maybe it won't help. Maybe it's finally he's at the moment where he goes so crazy, and the revenge thing comes out, and it relates to nobody's pocketbook,
Mm.
right? It's about him, and it's about you know January 6th or something that doesn't affect anybody directly that day.
Well, going off of what Jeffrey was saying there's been some political science papers that looked at 2018 in the places that Trump campaigned in the general election, and it found that it actually had the effect of bringing out more Democrats
In
than Republicans.
2018. In 2018.
Yeah.
Okay.
But here's the double-edged sword for Republicans is that yeah, it's going to generate a lot more Democrats, but is that your only thing to be able to generate more Republican turnout? So it's kind of like one of those things where like do you want to be shot or stabbed? And one thing, the last thing just in this segment that I was going to Jeff made me think is that as far as turning out African Americans in Detroit, I think Pete Buttigieg may be the last Democrat that you would send to Detroit, given that often if you look at his polling in the presidential race, his numbers with African Americans, it is generally zero in many polls. And I don't mean low, I just mean like None. Like nobody that identified it, that said they were an African American said they were voting for Pete Buttigieg in a Democratic primary.
What's interesting is the low propensity voter. When you raise that, I think of the people I used to work with back in 1972 in a Teamster Union local, and who basically their attitude was all the bastards are corrupt, they're crooks, the hell with them. And then they would go vote for Wallace and Nixon. And and that's what's interesting. That group that Trump was able to mobilize, that's an interesting question about how that's going to happen in this issue in this particular election. Now, let me turn to the deportation issue. Um, we have SCOTUS basically allowing the deportation, the removal of temporary protective status from Haitians, from Sudanese, etc. And and it was very interesting. I was watching in Ohio, people mobilizing in I guess, the suburbs of Cleveland, because it wasn't Cleveland where Trump said everybody was eating the cats.
Springfield.
Springfield. So I'm just curious, how do you see, Shawn, where we're at with that deportation issue? And then, of course, you had what occurred in Spain last week with this, as I see it, a move by Morocco. Morocco has done this before in their pressuring to disrupt relations with Algeria and Spain. But it was interesting to watch right wingers come in from the mainland and then get booed out in Spain, in Quetta, by the local people who said, "We don't want you here." But that whole deportation issue, I'm just wondering your take on this, because it still remains, to me, a very divisive issue. And I'm just curious what's your sense of the resonance of this right now and how it's being played out in the midterms?
Well, just an interesting story is that a few years ago, kind of right after COVID, when you could get like these insanely cheap airfares to Europe, I actually went to Spain and I wanted
Ah,
to take the ferry to go to Morocco to go to Tangier. But Morocco was still not open because of COVID. So my choice was I actually went to Quetta.
you went
So
to
I
Quetta.
actually
Oh,
went
wow,
there.
hilarious.
Yeah, so the only problem is I should have known this because I've traveled in Europe a lot. I went on a Sunday. Basically, my food choices were I could go back to Spain or I could eat at McDonald's. Um, but I think that something interesting I've been looking at, you know, Morocco is actually very close to Trump. They actually have built a new highway and named it the President Donald J. Trump Highway.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I think that we know that technically he's the prime minister, but they in Spain they actually call the prime minister the president, which is a weird thing. But he has been one of the biggest critics of Trump in Europe. Wouldn't let the U.S. use any,
Sanchez, you mean?
you know, yeah, Pedro Sanchez.
Okay.
And I think there's an election that will be next year, I think, in Spain, which elections there are usually pretty close, and they have to rely on coalition governments. Though the thing is, there's two parties that occupy most of the space, the PSOE and the PP. But I just wonder if there's something with Morocco, Trump, Sanchez kind of going on there. But as far as the deportations, I think that's a trickier thing. I think that where Trump has really seen his numbers go down, where some of those big ICE raids and things, we saw in Minneapolis, what we've seen in Maine, where people in 2024, the hardcore MAGA people, I think they would probably kick out a third of the country if they had the option. But kind of middle of the road people were thinking like, oh, Biden did a bad job on the border. Oh, and Trump's just going to get rid of the bad people. And what you were saying is like, oh, Trump's getting rid of the nice lady at the restaurant down here. Um, but where I say it's kind of tricky is that um, as far as counties, how they shifted in 2020 between 2020 and 2024, the second biggest shift of any county in Ohio was Clark County towards Trump
Mm.
by more than 10 points from where he performed against Joe Biden. So that was clearly something, there was clearly something there that led a substantially larger number of people to vote for Trump on that issue. But But I think that where I have seen that this could even have more resonance might not be necessarily there in Springfield, but actually in places like Florida, because a lot of the Haitians that are here work in healthcare, home healthcare, and those are areas that there is an enormous shortage. And it's not like you can just pick somebody up off the street and fill those jobs. So as far as what's going to happen in Ohio, just given what we saw in 2024 after, they weren't eating dogs and cats. And they weren't eating ducks either. I think the thing was that like some ducks had gotten killed and somebody was trying to drag them off to dispose of their carcasses. But I think we're just gonna have to see.
Mm, okay. Jeffrey, your take on the deportation issue, where we're at with that?
Yeah, I was thinking I'm actually part of a project tracking the deportation of people who work in healthcare and the effects, and on especially the short-term project this month is on the effects of people that work in long-term care facilities, care homes, nursing homes, assisted living, etc. And it's starting to bite. And as Shawn said, Florida, what's the economy in Florida other than tourism, healthcare, and services, um, and hurricane insurance? Sad to me because Liberty City is the high ground in Miami, which was traditionally a Haitian American community, and those people have been getting evicted because of gentrification from rich people looking for the high ground in the Miami area. But I still think Trump has some traction on that issue, despite the extreme cruelty, the Gestapo tactics, and the publicized activities. I'm wondering what you all think too. He just had the federal government plunk down several $100 million for a core civic facility, privately owned ICE detention center, and another one. One was in Texas, I think. One was in Florida, I believe, if my memory is correct, to keep them even more secretive under a kind of federal control regime. If you hide it, people won't see it. That said, they announced again the ICE minister announced that, and they've been coming into the Bronx in New York City heavily. So our elected officials here have been on alert. We all carry whistles and we're all trained. And we have in New York City a program with volunteers in league with small businesses, particularly small businesses that employ mostly landed, people with or documented, but are nevertheless from immigrant communities. Um, I'm interested also in the effects on agriculture. So on the one hand, we've had the poison lettuce and the inspection regime and the inspection personnel in the federal government has been devastated. It wasn't great before. We have agribusiness, which has its own interests. And then we have the people that do a lot of the work that are being deported. And there have been reports, as Shawn said before, people who work even in that field who are missing their employees. You have Trump voting farmers going on television all the time, all over the country saying, yeah, I voted for Trump. I might vote for him again, but is this really necessary? Like, what am I going to do now? Who's going to pick this? And I've seen three more reports just this week. It's been almost a leitmotif of the Trump administration. Back to Europe for a minute. I'm kind of on Spain's side. Spain and Italy have been in a sort of pissing match over this and over Schengen, which is the free movement of people and within the European Union, with the Italian government being very critical. But perhaps for another show. But I think right-wing parties across the world are using migration. The right-wing party in Australia used it. I still think it has currency, and I'm depressed about it, and we have to fight that. The uh, well, I'll stop there.
All right, fine. Now, Shawn, I wanted you to give your sense of where we're at with the SAVE Act. Trump keeps bringing that up, and you have all these measures of gerrymandering. I think in Tennessee, that primary was in a gerrymandered state. But
Mhm.
what's your take on where we're at with the passing of the SAVE Act and that whole issue of voter suppression from some people's point of view?
Well, I mean, Trump seems like a dog trying to get a bone. or kind of like a dog trying to chase a car with it, because it's obviously not going to pass. Uh, and Republicans are not going to eliminate the filibuster, because I mean they benefit from it. I mean, because you just think about the things that you don't need um, 60 votes for: tax cuts and judges. They're fine with that. They're fine that they can do that and they don't have to worry about that, because I mean I think that they worry. I think that the real fear among Republicans is that Democrats will get in and they'll eliminate the filibuster, at least in certain areas. But I mean I just don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think that something that might be interesting, and I don't think it'll ever happen, is that if you get kind of like a could you pair like not where the SAVE Act is on things, but not a strict photo ID law, but just basically some type of more limited photo ID law, and pair that with, let's say, banning gerrymandering
Hmm.
at the federal level. I mean, it's something that I think that among the public, I think it would be quite popular. But I mean, like I said, I just don't think that you're going to have 50 Republican votes in the Senate to eliminate the filibuster when they know that, it's their big thing. Because, if I'm the Democrats in 20, if I'm in control of the Senate and the House in 2029, one of the first things I would be looking at doing is adding more states to the country, because the Senate, the math in the Senate is not great for Democrats. Because if you just think about it like this, if you take all the basically all the states that voted for Trump by double digits, and you give Republicans all those senators, that gets you to 48. I mean, Democrats basically, you just think about it, they have to win all of the blue states and almost all of the seats in the purple states. So, if you added the District of Columbia, and there's some issues with the 23rd Amendment on that would have to be fixed. Um, that gets you two additional Democratic senators. Puerto Rico doesn't necessarily automatically get you two additional senators. I mean, and if they wanted to really be bold, there's the U.S. Virgin Islands, which would be there would be a question of whether the U.S. Virgin Islands or D.C. would become the most Democratic state in the country. But I know I probably veered off a little bit
No,
there,
no,
but
no, no, no. No, okay. So,
I mean, it's not going to get better on the House side with the next census after what they've done
mhm.
to the Census Bureau too, and that, and where population has been drifting, notwithstanding climate change.
well, my final comment about what's happening is this issue of the fighting over the people on the Fed. And you had the whole issue with Trump basically pushing to oust the predecessor. And now you have him trying to reverse the decision that defended Lisa Cook from not being expulsed, and now he wants to go ahead and expulse her. But I'm just, what I sort of find interesting in the fight over the Fed is that uh, you know, I think that he wants to control the banking system directly and play around with it for his own benefit and politically and personally, perhaps. But what do you think, Shawn? How do you make sense of that political economy issue happening with them battling over control of the Federal Reserve?
Well, I remember when we were talking, I think last month, and I think we were talking about the birthright citizenship case,
Oh
and
yeah,
I think Jeffrey
he's
and
also
I were,
that's
yeah,
an interesting question to raise that because he
uh,
also issued the two executive orders that said, okay, the hell with that, go on the
and
birthright.
I think that one of the things that Jeffrey and I were kind of mentioning was not that Trump lost the cases; it's that Trump had 4 votes on his side on those cases, um, which that's going to embolden him. But I mean, the thing is, the Fed is a lot bigger than just one person. But if you're slowly chipping away at it, and he's got some loyalists on there already. One of the dangerous things could be undermining the independence of the central bank. I mean, because you saw that happen in Turkey, and let's just say the economy in Turkey ain't that great anymore under Erdogan. And that's one of the reasons. I mean, I think that we'd seen this in the past in Argentina, which strangely we are propping up right now. But that's a whole other story.
All right, Jeffrey, you have any comments?
Also, elites like a quote independent Fed, using the word independent in heavy quote marks. And even elites that have supported Trump uh, are nervous that he'll mess with that. What we've learned about Trump's attacks on people, including on Lisa Cook, is that sort of anybody that talks back, he just likes to beat up. He doesn't seem to have a metric across the board of actual success at prosecuting them. He likes them to have to spend money, be uncomfortable, ruin their lives, from John Bolton to you name it. So just keeping Lisa Cook twisting in the wind because she had the temerity to not agree with everything, down the line, seems to be the goal at this point, if he's thought about it that critically. I mean, I'm quoting all the observers and people around him who've said that. Um, and I'm trying to figure out, Wash, there was a piece in the Financial Times last week and a couple of other business publications that, here's Trump's golden boy, right? But you know how long that lasts. There was a terrific cartoon of Jeanine Pirro yesterday,
Yeah, Jimmy.
running from a bus that driven by Trump, right? He has no loyalty to anybody. In fact, that's something, you have no loyalty to the American people. I actually once spoke to Chuck Schumer about messaging that. Like, where are we talking about that? He's disloyal to his closest, people. He'd sell anybody out. Maybe, we can make something of that in the ether in our messaging. So, meanwhile, people, including in places like Canada, are sitting on lots of dollars in some cases that they could dump, right? That's always called the third rail. So doesn't seem cognizant of that people could really sink things. They go with us, of course.
Well, and that's interesting. Shawn can jump in. You mentioned Jeanine Pirro. I met Jeanine Pirro. I used to actually work with her politically about 25 years ago when she was the DA in Westchester County. And this whole reflecting pool debacle, which is quite interesting because what does he do? He was indicting some Olympian for trying to mess with it, and it turns out that he got angry at her when she decided to attack Birnbaum by saying he's an incompetent idiot about the question of fungi in the reflecting pool. But again, imposing his vision that this is indeed a sabotage that was done. A quite remarkable incident. Anyway, other people have any comments or questions they want to direct to Shawn or Jeffrey? Just raise your hands. Mike, go on, Mike.
Well, I have to apologize. I missed the first 20 minutes because I was caught in a rainstorm. But so if I
I'm sure
repeat
it did you
anything,
some good, Michael.
it didn't do my clothing any good. I can't speak for myself. But I was just wondering, to what degree in the elections, I mean, we've seen actually a lot of extremism, obviously extremism coming from the right, but there is extremism coming from the left. Not totally. I mean, it's not.
What do you mean
but
by
it's
that? Okay, let me
yeah,
stop right there. What do you mean by that, Michael? What do you mean by
I mean,
extremism from the left?
well, extremism, we would just call extremism. I mean, we say, how far away from the center do you get? So in other words, an extreme, in other words, if you take the center of American politics, wherever it is right now, how far in one direction do you get? I would say that that the administration we have right now is an extremist administration. MAGA is extremist, and then there are extremists on the left. But you don't need that many extremists for the other side to play them all as extremists. And what I see possibly happening in the election, if let's say I'm just using them as an example, if one Democratic socialist, one spokesman for the Democratic Socialists makes a comment where he says, yes, we should, obviously Israel shouldn't exist, and 9/11
You missed
was
it.
our own fault.
We've talked about this, by the way. Go on.
Yes, I know. But so the question is, to what degree is that going, do you think that's going to play out? Obviously, people are going to try to use it, but how much influence do you think it will have?
All right, and let me add to that, Shawn. I was looking at Fox is bringing on some of these senior people in the DSA, and they're actually saying, "Well, they're reading their program out, which essentially calls for a restructuring completely of the United States government." And I was also looking at a chart of all the political factions in DSA, which reminded me of some early version of STS in 1966 or 67, not 68, 69, but 66, 67. And then there, and that sort of adds with Michael saying, like the whole question of, the communism issue, which, but what's your sense of Michael's comment about this extremist question? Question.
Well, I mean, I think that one thing that you have to be thinking too is I think that we're thinking of the center of the country as a whole. But if you're thinking about what's the center of voters in Park Slope in Brooklyn, probably the center there is a very, 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 very far left person. Just like I think that there's these little they're not little, but there's these counties in northern Idaho that have kind of like a big ground for like people in California that just wanted to be in the most right-wing place in the world, and they kind of all congregated up there. I mean, the thing is that the center there probably is that you're a member of a militia and carry a assault weapon around everywhere. So I think in some ways it's kind of relative to where you are. But I think that this is something that Jeffrey and I mentioned earlier, is that that the Democrats are always going to want to attach or try to make all Republicans seem like the furthest right person out there. The inverse thing. So, you might remember that Donald Trump was always wanting, he was saying like going after AOC, the squad, and, those folks, and Democrats, would want to try to attach like to Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of the further out there people. I mean, I think it depends sometimes on more individual candidates. Is there a way to actually tie them to those people that's gonna be effective? I mean, I think that the thing we were talking about earlier in Michigan, the real worry for Dr. El Said is the whole Hassan Piker thing. Because, literally, if the day before the primary you're at a pool party with him, and you're basically still kind of with him, does he need, for some of our folks that are as old as me, or older, does he need kind of his Sister Soldier moment? Or does he need, with that, maybe like a Reverend Wright speech?
Yeah, interesting. And just to add to that, I'm looking at this meeting that Tucker Carlson had with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Joe Kent. I mean, Nick Fuentes wasn't there, so Tucker was a little
Was
smart.
Michael Flynn there?
I'm not sure if Michael Flynn. That's interesting. I don't think if that I do not know that. That's an interesting question, Michael Flynn.
I don't know either. For some reason, I was thinking that he might not have been there, but I think I saw a picture of him and Thomas Massey together.
Ah, yes, Massey was up there, and then the question is that they're talking about obviously projecting somebody to run for president. And Tucker, I believe, is who they've been bandying about. But anyway, do you have some more on that extremism comment, Michael?
Oh, well, no, actually, in other words, what I was saying is regardless. I mean, in other words, with Piker, for instance, one of the comments he's being held to the flames for, and I'm not defending him or attacking him, but he did apologize for. However, once in this day and age, in this age of social media and AI, once you say something, it's like the old story with the New York Times. They would print some, or any newspaper, they would print something on the front page, and then as an apology, it would be on page 26 in small letters. It's hard to take back statements. So what I was wondering is to what degree, especially considering social media and again artificial intelligence, to what extent do you think in this election these accusations, these statements will be either accurately or blown out of proportion, whatever it is? How much influence would it have on the elections, do you think? I mean, what's your projection on that?
I was just going to say the half-life of social media is 12 seconds. The memory is 12 seconds. And, I agree with every comment Shawn made in this subject too, but I actually think I'm remembering back when a much smaller DSA director, Frank Llewellyn, a good guy, was on Fox News about 15 years ago, and they had wasn't O'Reilly, but one of their front front range hosts had a big jar of jelly beans, I guess referencing Ronald Reagan. He said, "Explain socialism to me," and he was taking his jelly beans and sort of teasing him. It was kind of kind of sick from the point of view of Fox. But I actually don't think the communism charge is going to have much currency because I just don't think people really know what it is anymore. Michael Harrington, the founder of DSA, died in 1989 as the Berlin Wall was coming down, and he was our biggest spokesperson. I think that the othering of people, including Al Said and immigrants and others, still has currency. Racism, unbelievably and tragically, big time. No great observation. So there's plenty of stuff the right and the hard right can still use. But and also, one of the observations I have of the enlarged DSA is they can choose their shots. They're actually not running in that many districts. I know they're getting an outsized megaphone now. They're not in that many districts. They're whole vast swaths of America where there's no, quote, DSA candidate. And this taking nothing away from the organization for the moment. So my 2 cents.
Well, thank you.
One thing I just wanted to add that I think Jeffrey had mentioned just a little bit earlier is that there was a DSA candidate that won a seat in Detroit in Congress, but that was a weird race. It reminds me, it's not, there's a somewhat parallel, I think, to New York 13, which I mentioned here in a second. But one of the issues is that, you think about, historically, if you asked what cities were the most important to the Black community, I mean, today you're probably going to say Atlanta. 50 years ago, you would say Detroit, Harlem, Chicago. For the last couple of years, Detroit has had no Black representation. And because you'd had Rashida Tlaib wins a primary where the African American vote splinters. Sri Tandahar, same thing. And I think that a lot of that was not necessarily so much ideology because the person that he beat actually used to be in the DSA himself. I think that it was a little bit more about getting African American representation finally to Detroit. And the one thing is, and I have to see what Jeffrey thinks about this because he would be more tuned in than myself, is that I'm still thinking back on the Chevalier versus Espaillat race. And one of the things that I kind of was thinking about there is that really Espaillat had a troubled relationship with African American political leaders in Harlem. And those are who he needed to bail him out. And they really kind of sat out the race. And the thing that I often wonder right now was this kind of a thing where they might be thinking, those leaders, that we've got somebody that says some really weird stuff to a lot of people, and Chevalier. Do we come back in 2 years basically with, I'm trying to think of I know the last name of the Manhattan Democratic chairman. I think his son is in the assembly.
Yes.
Does he come back and run? So just be
No,
interested.
actually, his son confronted me because I was campaigning for his opponent in my partisan life, who's the son of the chair of the Manhattan Democratic Party, who was an assembly member himself and the son of a, old guard Harlem, a very good judge, actually. But Espaillat was losing his voters in Manhattan to gentrification and being priced out and other aspects. He was, as with another more progressive candidate in New York 7, replacing Nydia Velázquez, the incumbent, who's far more progressive than Espaillat ever was, and actually really did useful things, and not a whit's worth of difference, really, programmatically, between the person that won that seat in Brooklyn, Queens. Um, Espaillat was seen as, a little out of touch, a little lazy. He was warned uh, to by forces in New York and Working Families Party and others that he should join the Block the Bombs legislation as it relates to Israel and Palestine. Um, and um, and as Shawn mentioned, there's also the internecine intergroup competition that's been going on a long time. I I say this with no joy. I sometimes walk across Harlem and I'm hard pressed to see a black face, honestly, on certain days. That's purely anecdotal. Obviously, we massive numbers of people of color living in that traditional center of African America, which, as Shawn also said, is now not so central to that project for reasons of population and gentrification and moves, and also the moves of people who are more affluent from those communities who've moved out and even moved back to the South from northern cities, including New York. So Adriano Espaillat, the incumbent Congress member who's being replaced by Chevalier, also, helped sort of keep the Republicans in power with an Andrew Cuomo project. So there was also that kind of revenge from the general progressive and union left. So there were, Chevalier, who a lot of us interviewed in the beginning, was unbelievably unimpressive. And she was doing all Palestine all the time. She went to a consultant, straightened her out, and had a much um, more resonant message based on affordability and somebody new who's not an incumbent, who's making everything expensive for me. I don't want to be too reductionist, but that's one of the specifics in that district, which has a lot of moving parts.
Okay, interesting. Go on, Vincent. You have to unmute. Yeah.
Yeah, hey Sean, it's really great listening to you. We uh we started talking about Dr. El Saif like 6 weeks ago, right, Jim?
Oh yeah, we've been talking about him.
Yeah, we've talked in a while. So Sean, so once we started talking about it, I every day would look at the polls, and you know that Dr. El Saif was ahead by 10 points in all these polls. And why did he end up only winning by 1%? Historically, I guess I'm 69 and I've heard this for 60 years that, state polls are not very reliable. Were they just not very reliable and they were just that far off?
Well, I think that's something we'll definitely have to look into. Primaries are notoriously tough to poll, uh, because another thing that you have is that I hate to take things to Kentucky here, but I remember whenever I was younger, that the Lexington Herald Leader and the Louisville Courier Journal would do the bluegrass poll, a really high quality poll every month, to kind of see what folks were up to in Kentucky, how they viewed races. You don't have that poll anymore. What you have is that since newspapers have declined so much, they don't really have the resources to go in and hire very high quality pollsters.
Mm,
TV stations really aren't doing it as much
mm,
since we've seen so much consolidation in the media industry. So what's flooded in are a lot of polls that might be affiliated with a particular candidate, maybe not their internal polls. Um, and then I think there's some other things we would have to consider. Was it measuring the fact that a lot of his supporters were very enthusiastic, and some of Stevens' supporters were like, yeah, I'm gonna vote for her, versus, like Abdul, Abdul, Abdul. And then I think the last potential thing, and this is something that may have a big effect on polling in the general election versus what we will see on election day. So, for those of you that are older, hopefully you've heard of the term the Bradley effect. This was a race in 1982 between the then Attorney General of California, George Deukmejian, and the mayor of Los Angeles, Tom Bradley. And that was a good Democratic year, 1982. I was 4 at the time. Um, but um, but what happened is that the polling showed that Bradley was going to win, going to sweep the race. He ends up narrowly losing. And what we talk about with the Bradley effect was, and by the time you get to Barack Obama, there were a lot of Democrats that were worried going into election night there that you'd have the Bradley effect where people would say they would vote for the black candidate, but when they got to the polling booth, they didn't. So
Right.
so the question that I have, and we'll have to see as the race goes on, are we actually seeing like a Bradley effect for Abdul El-Sayed,
Hmm.
where you have some people that when it comes down to it decided that they couldn't vote for the Muslim candidate?
Interesting.
Now, as you know, you've probably seen the numbers. In Dearborn, he got 77% of the vote, and so
Also not a very good turnout too.
right. So is it so you have I don't know if you've heard um, what the congresswoman today. She didn't really give him a ringing endorsement. She
You're talking
she
about Haley Stevens,
Yeah,
the
Hilly
oh,
Stevens today
yeah.
said, I heard it run multiple times. She didn't really give a ringing endorsement. They asked her about if she said, my people have to look within, I'm paraphrasing, and they have to make a decision. She didn't say go vote for him. She didn't give him a ringing endorsement. She gave this like, my people have to look within themselves to decide how they should vote. It was,
Well, it's rare that a losing candidate, I'm not disagreeing with you,
yeah.
goes, often full bore for the person that defeated him. I'll say, Ed, national Democrats such as they are, others in Michigan, and the ground game has to really work, along with whatever other money could be brought to bear. I love Celinda Lake. I used to love the LA Times Washington Post poll in the old days, and I talked to a
Hmm.
lot of pollsters. And one of the things we do in elections now is not rely on them so much, following up from Sean's lead, in part because also the migration to cell phones, the structure of the workday, the number of contingent workers in the economy who aren't home when people used to get called. I remember the original Iowa polls in the 70s where you could find people home eating dinner at 5:30 and 6. And also the telemarketing. We all have ring-fenced machines, and we're constantly bombarded, even with that. So we do a lot of data mining on I'll call them pre-canvases, and Al Said and his people did some of that also. I'm not just talking about his gubernatorial race 8 years ago, where we go out and knock doors and try and get a sense. I'm not going to say it's scientific, but we choose areas based on their political profile and previous voting proclivities and places where we've had low propensity voters. Our people, in quotes, people we know will come out, but they may need a little push. And we bring that data back. That's what resulted in 3 wins in unlikely places in the Hudson Valley of New York State. It was data mining in the winter out of the context of elections before that. So we've become somewhat more reliant on that without, in my case, being a techno fetishist. We all use something called Minivan, but there are other programs out there. So that headquarters is getting this stuff. And even after election day, people have gone out. I'm not claiming in quantities of thousands and thousands, but people went out Wednesday and Thursday too in Michigan.
Interesting. Interesting.
Thanks.
I'm going to turn to Alex, but as I'm turning to Alex, I wanted both of you to also comment about this renewed push to go burn Dr. Fauci that we saw, which, and I'm somebody, all of us, most of us here are New Yorkers, and all of us remember rather vividly the pandemic and all its pernicious effects. And I also remember vividly the day that Trump told everybody he'll take chloride. So it's very difficult to watch the self-righteousness of these guys going after Fauci, even though they got the ammo of that diary to throw in the mix. But I'm going to turn to Alex. But just keep that in mind. I'm sort of curious to hear what you want to have to say about all this. Go on, Alex.
Yeah, so I was just, recently looking at, the Republican and Democratic Party favorability, which is, I mean, amazes me, the positive, again, this is real clear politics, the average like 37 Democrats, but 38 Republicans, which again, obviously speaks to a big problem for Democrats that, they're less, regardless of Trump and everything, they're, by the polling, they're less popular than the Republicans. So I just wonder, yeah, since you guys are kind of on that side, like, yeah, how does that persist and like what can be done to I mean, this thing is absolutely, I mean, thing is just, bad messaging and especially with Trump to hang over them, that you would still be less popular than the Republican Party.
Well,
Aren't the Fauci attacks, Jim, an admission that they have to go back to old tried and true anti-vax,
right,
anti-public health nonsense as the measles rates are exploding, as
right.
Ebola in Africa is
Yeah.
threatening potentially to, move around even more, as there's not a lot of good news around. What else are they going to pull out?
Well,
And
I mean, one could sort of look objectively as, I mean, one of the factors I'm sure in the back of Trump's mind, I could be wrong, in initiating the bombing of Iran was that whole pile of, we have, the Epstein files getting to the point where there was that implication that he had raped a 13-year-old. And that was about ready to, people were starting to focus in on it. Now. Again, is there a causal relationship with that? Probably not. But I don't think Trump um, is we know that that issue would sink him completely if the truth came out. But but my response to what Alex has said is the alienation is there. Political alienation and enemy is a real factor in America, and it's been going on for decades. And we see it in the manifestation of Trump getting elected to president to start with. I mean, who would have believed him coming down the stairs and making those cockamamie kind of claims about Mexican Americans and rapists, and then the guy gets elected? I mean, it's quite astounding. But go on, Shawn, your
Right.
comment on this.
Well, I mean, my
Yeah.
thing there would be, I think the basis for it is that Democrats don't deliver real change. Again,
Well,
they talk change.
yeah.
And, what's the last, I guess, Obamacare. And I know, talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, which again, but none of these things are ever made permanent. And again, now, Trump's stripping away the subsidies for Obamacare. So, now people are going to be more pissed about their Obamacare because, they're going to be paying more.
Well, and
And,
also,
is it eventually, and of course, again, yeah, you can see the Republicans now, they're sort of bringing up, oh, Social Security is going to go bankrupt again. All that, Pete Peterson nonsense. So I mean, I think at some point Democrats have to actually deliver, long-term sustained change, like something like what FDR did. Again, which again, where Democrats were, you know, so popular that they didn't lose the Congress for what, the 40 years after,
well, and that's a very good point because look at Mamdani. Mamdani sits there and
yeah,
emulates LaGuardia
yeah,
of
you
all
know,
mayors. But go on, Shawn. Your comments about all this.
yeah.
Well, one of the things that you have to look at with those numbers showing that Democrats have a lower favorability than Republicans, I think that that's a little bit it's a little bit tricky. And the reason is that if you look at independents, they don't like either party. If you look at Republicans, they overwhelmingly approve of their own party. A sizable chunk, about half of Democrats don't have a favorable opinion of their own party. And the thing is, it's actually coming from both directions. A significant chunk is that that thinks the party is not liberal enough, and then there's a chunk in the party that thinks that they're too liberal. So, I mean, I think that kind of makes me think, jumping ahead to 2028 in the Democratic primaries, is there somebody that can hit that sweet spot between the two kind of more moderate faction and the more progressive faction? Um, because I mean I think the worry is that if you nominate somebody clearly on the progressive side, um, do you get where that alienates some people in the center? But if you nominate somebody more clearly on the moderate side, does that depress turnout? So is there somebody that can kind of hit both of them? Um, and then of course the other thing is what will if Donald Trump's still president, he might have a 25% approval rating by 2018, where it might not matter as much who the Democratic nominee is. Kind of like a more 2008 thing, once in September you hit the financial crash, where, there, like I said, there was a lot of questioning, whenever general election voters went to the polls in November 2008, were they actually going to vote for the black guy?
One thing I wanted to bring up, we may have discussed this before, is the fights in red counties in the United States against AI data centers again, including in Michigan. And this week the Clarity Act was up, the digital deregulation, use that as shorthand. I mean, there's other destabilizing forces in the economy that are scaring people and scaring, I think, some moderate voters. I'm looking for polling on that now. And so we were talking about polling before. And, people looking at who might be on the swing, some of the people Shawn was referencing who were looking at their 401ks and getting a little nervous, who don't believe Trump is any more a good steward of their retirement and don't think they can go back into the paid labor force, whatever that is. So there's that too.
Yeah, very good point. The data centers we haven't talked about, and that's a fascinating issue to explore in depth. But Shawn, please, you can sort of add your points about that. Let me get to Aaron, and we'll sort of close it out with Aaron's comments. Go on, Aaron.
No, thanks. As the resident independent, that needs to be hated by both sides always. Um, I've always found this sort of thermostatics between both parties sort of fascinating, because between the media and the parties and obviously intellectual class, they only acknowledge independence exists once there's close enough races that you need to pull independents in for your side, and then they just basically play language games, kind of whack-a-mole with independents to say, hey, I'm not extreme, whatever that needs to mean by either party. Most independents that I know, I've been independent my whole life. We know each other. We have our own little circles. That's like a joke. But, we're sort of used to this, right? We're used to this sort of game. Like we almost have like a game within the game to say, well, I wonder what, when this candidate will decide. What's the over under on when they start, quote unquote, getting moderate? So I think what'll be interesting, and it'd be great to understand from your perspectives, how much do you think the Democrats can nominate we'll say, not Bill Clinton, because he doesn't exist anymore as a candidate, and it would be a new version of that, 2028, 35 years later. But how much do you think, or what's the potential to be able to nominate a candidate like that? Because I don't see a candidate like that coming out of the Republican Party for, at least the next, half a generation for sure. Because I don't, all the other independent, moderate, centrist types, right? The ones all you guys hate, because things we believe in and compromises and all the stuff we love about neoliberal economics and AI and tech and all that stuff. So I get why you hate it, but the point is that we're ultimately only going to vote typically for candidates that are somewhere within reach of that type of moderation. And if we don't find that candidate, often we'll either not vote, or the tolerable center right candidate will wind up getting many of those votes, or we'll wind up doing some split voting at times, or not voting at the presidential level, right? We'll vote everything else up and down ballot. And as someone who lives in New Jersey from LA, born and raised, I've seen sort of
the dynamics in the East and West Coast when it comes to moderate voting and non-moderate voting. And I've seen it sort of play out over the last, few decades of my life. It seems that if neither party wants that moderate vote, you could often have a very 2024 election, because that my view in 2024 is that was really a big part of why the Democrats lost, is they didn't really go after that, what we might call it the Clinton vote. That just
Aaron,
because I
while
think
we're
if they,
talking
yep,
about
sure,
Al-Said and such,
yep,
most of the candidates that I'm in my partisan life working with are all the definition of moderates.
sure, sure,
From Kate Conley,
yep,
military,
great
16
candidate.
years,
Yeah,
helicopter pilot and military, to Patrick Halpin, former suburban county executive. I mean, none of them are socialists.
sure,
And we're struggling to flip all these House seats, which I don't think is any done deal, by the way, despite the
yep.
polls and others. I think everyone is a guerrilla fight and a strategic battleground of difficulty.
No, I see the same thing in Orange County, and not this Orange County. I live in North Jersey now, but the Orange County in California, where Democrats made a huge transformation in Orange County over the last really since the GFC, since 2010s, but then started giving it back, and you started seeing far more left candidates coming into those spaces, and in some ways gave away ground, or giving away ground to, I'd say, pretty poor, way below average, further to the right candidates. And it's because there just isn't that consistent moderate set of candidates. And I think those are dangerous seats that could be lost, actually, by Democrats. I don't know what your opinion of that is, or how well you understand.
It's interesting you
Yeah.
bring up Orange County. My great aunt used to run the DAR down there, and so it shows you how Orange County has changed
Oh,
dramatically.
Orange County has changed dramatically. Trust me.
Yeah, go
I
on,
mean,
Shawn. Your comments about all this stuff.
Well, a state that I would actually point you to is actually Arizona, which the thing is, it voted for Biden by about 10,000 votes. I mean, we had the cyber ninjas come in there and audit, I use that in air quotes, Maricopa County. But, you look at Arizona now, which the thing is, it's a purple state, but it's a reddish purple state. Democrats control the governorship, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General's office, both Senate seats. They have a decent chance, actually, of taking both control of both houses of the legislature. And that's an interesting one, because Democrats have ran relatively moderate candidates, like Katie Hobbs. I'm thinking Mark Kelly, Ruben Gallego, who kind of initially was a lot more progressive, and by the time that he ran for the Senate in 2024, was much more moderate. But let's think of some of the reasons that they got elected. I mean, were they good candidates? Yes. Were some of them running against clinically insane people? Um, Maybe that's a little bit too far, but definitely Carrie Lake, Blake Masters, who has some kind of fetish about the Unabomber. They had some really far out there people for some of the lower statewide offices.
Right.
So, I mean, maybe that's kind of a good example there where the Democrats are running more moderate candidates. But I mean, I think the thing for 2028 is I think that you're going to have, I think that you would have, I don't know if AOC will run or not. I mean, there's a lot of speculation. She has a lot of options for 2028. I'll put it like that. But, Ro Khanna is definitely, he wants to run. I mean, he's running. He'll definitely say I'm a progressive. But I think that one of the things that you will see in the Democratic primary is that, other than maybe him and some other people kind of on the further left part of the party, I think a lot of them are going to, they're really going to want to shy away from labels. They aren't going to want to say moderate, progressive. I mean, I think that it's going to be that you're going to start seeing more and more candidates saying, like, I'm the fighter, rather than so I mean, somebody that clearly wants to run, we've spent a lot of time talking about Michigan tonight, is Alyssa Slotkin. Definitely kind of identified more as a moderate Democrat, but she's basically saying, I'm the Midwesterner, and I'm the fighter. I'm willing to go after these folks. So I mean, I think that it might not be as kind of stark of a choice. It may be, we might be looking at it differently than we say the last contested Democratic primaries in 2016 and 2020.
Yeah, let me turn.
So much more personality based, you mean? Just very, hyper personality driven? Because that's something that I've been sort of shocked by some of these candidates, like Dr. Al Saeed. Saeed is a professional, healthcare professional, and I've been looking for months about, because it's something he knows. He's written 3 books, academic books, or 2 of them which were, and he's a professor of, like an actual professor, like in surgery, and plus a public health official. And he hasn't talked at all about that, right? I mean, it's a little weird to me, right? It's like this is his actual competence. What
He
he's
has
really,
mentioned
really
that
wrong.
in the campaign. He's led with that a lot, actually. He has led with that.
Yeah. Anyway, and it's very interesting because Arizona is a completely crazy state. You got a lot of humdingers down there of all types. My mother lived in Arizona for quite a while and was involved in Democratic Party politics. There was no Democratic Party anything in Scottsdale. And I remember when I first met Barry Goldwater, which was I was taken to a Republican Party luncheon in Scottsdale, and here's Goldwater pissed off at the Republican Party because he was opposed to fundamentalist Christianity getting dominating it, and also he was pissed off over their anti-gay stances because I think his niece was gay, openly gay, and so and I met his sister, who was a friend of my mother's. So it was like it was a different kind of world to meet all these people. But Michael, go on. We'll finish with you, Mike.
Yeah. Excuse me. Well, I wanted to go into, because you sort of brought this up, which was the idea of racism, which is becoming, it's always been in this country, but I think that the sense of shame about it is diminishing as compared to, let's say, 25 or 30 years ago. But I had somebody say to me, this happened a few times, somebody from the distinct, in other words, on the far left, who would say to me, well, Jews own the world. And they said, well, we don't mean you, Mike. You're one of the good ones. And I've been playing poker too long for that to get past me. So, and I've heard it with too many other, with African Americans, et cetera. So I was really kind of shocked to kind of hear this kind of stuff coming from the far left. I would have expected it from the far right. But do you think that, considering either consciously or unconsciously, to what degree in this election, as opposed to, let's say, 20 years ago or 50 years ago, to what degree you think that actual racism is going to play a part on both sides? Obviously, more so on the far right, but I mean, how much do you think it's going to go in there, with any group?
Well, I think that one of the questions you have to look at is, are there certain people that are normalizing some of it?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, I was actually just taking some notes here as you were talking. I think there's a primary, not next week, but I think the week after that in Florida, where the leading Republican candidate is Congressman Byron Donalds, who's an very conservative African American endorsed by Trump. And literally 2 of the other candidates in the race are, one of them is a literal groyper, if viewers have heard that term. And both him and the person that's the lieutenant governor, who was appointed lieutenant governor, have basically been taking not even veiled shots at Donalds, basically because he's black. Donald still, I think, because of the Trump endorsement, is overwhelmingly favored. But, one of the things that I saw in some polling is that, so I think that the Groyper's, and he would probably say that he is a guy named James Fishback. And among Republicans 18 to 29, he's actually ahead
Really? Wow.
in some polling. But the one thing is, I think that we know what Florida has a lot of, and that's old people. So that's definitely going to be the demographic that carries the day in a Republican primary, and probably a Democratic primary in Florida. And one other thing, kind of going off something that Jim was saying earlier about Barry Goldwater, is that actually shortly before he died in kind of the mid 90s, in 1992. So maybe this is that when I was a teenager, I spent a lot of time reading the Almanac of American Politics too much at night. He actually endorsed the Democrat in the newly drawn 6th district, which included Scottsdale and kind of like the rural northeastern part of the state, a lady named Karen English that ended up winning that seat. I mean, she lost in 1994 to J.D. Hayworth, who some of us might remember was a frequent person on cable news for. He lost in '06. But I think that showed you kind of where that was going, because one of the things that I talk about when I talk about in one of my con law classes, whenever we talk about Sandra Day O'Connor, clearly a historic figure, one of the people that was really pushing her on the court was Barry Goldwater. And she actually, she got confirmed unanimously, 99-0. The one senator that didn't show up actually wrote her an apology note that he wasn't able to be there to make it 100-0. But one of the people that was attacking her nomination was actually Jerry Falwell. That really goes along with what you were saying there. But I think that going back a little bit to what Michael was saying, I think the question is, how much does this stuff become more normalized? That it becomes something that you can say, and you don't get where like everybody comes down on you. You get where like, well, the other side will, but they find a way to make it okay. I mean, the one thing I worry about, and I can see this happening in some places. I think that you have some people, white folks, like me. No, not like me personally. I'm just saying that I'm white folks here. Are you going to have somebody that literally says, it's okay for me to say the N-word? I mean, I just wonder at what point do we get to that?
Oh, we
And I'm worried we're going to get to that.
I would argue we're already at that point because, and then the erosion of the kind of issues that you're talking about with racism. Look at this attacks on the Smithsonian Institution and all the national park signs and exhibits being taken down that deal with slavery, for example. They removed Jackie Robinson from the Pentagon at one point.
With the Republicans, by the way.
Republicans did that, and then everybody got upset about that and put it back in. Now, the question of racism and the kind of comment you made about the Jews control the world, see, that's all this slippery slope when you're dealing with the volatile issue, which we're going to talk about next week, by the way, on Tuesday when we bring in Ian Lustig and Eli Clifton on their latest book that basically is Mearsheimer and Walt Part 2. That's what this book is, the Israel Lobby book. And the issue is a very real one because, you have in our society, as we know, there are lobbies for all sorts of domestic and international interests that operate. And the issue of supporting Israel has, lobby or not, I mean, it's been going back. I would argue that this lobby, the quote Israel lobby, essentially takes form in 1942, coming out of the conference at the Biltmore Hotel, when the issue of when Rabbi Weiss and Rabbi Silver argued the necessity to set up a Jewish state is a imperative and pushed that into the Democratic Party and Republican Party in 1944. It was an issue in the midterms in 1944. And that was, that's the midterm, so that's actually a presidential election year. So this issue's been with us for a long time. And the question of how we, work around it and do that. Now, you and I have argued about this, and I know you agree that to sit there and critique Israel is not racist. Okay. I mean, that I reject completely. That's absurd. The question of what you just said, that somebody would then say Jews control the world, that does verge into those kind of categories. And I certainly have heard people on the left come out again with all sorts of ridiculous and uninformed comments about Israel and Judaism, which are offensive and deserve to be rightly condemned. But then look at what's going on here in New York with Mamdani. I think he's unfairly getting hammered with the kind of issues. I mean, what happened with the Little Italy not being in the that ethnic map, and then he got booed in Staten Island. But Jeffrey knows a lot more about this than I do with Mamdani. So jump in there.
I would close my comments whenever I think about Jews controlling the world. I always talk about it. I always say I do, and I'm an audience. And also Barry Goldwater, who now I guess would be a socialist to Republicans. I think of Lenny Bruce. Go to YouTube. He had two great routines about both subjects. But in terms of racism, to get back to, a corollary of, can you criticize the state of Israel? Of course, the government of the state of Israel. But do Jews have a right to one state in the world for safety, a lifeboat state, in light of Jewish history, without prejudicing the people that also share that space with them somehow? I'm thinking back to Florida because of Shawn's comment. One of the things we've been doing is telling people, particularly people who happen to be Black, who happen to be Latino or Latina, who happen to be Asian American, etc., they have to be very careful now because of the laws that the Republicans in Florida and DeSantis got through his legislature, with even with ID requirements for dropping off ballots early at polling places. And we are looking at the counties where, the red counties where they're trying to make it more difficult, as they did years ago when I was down there campaigning for Betty Castor, the Democrat for Senate then, and people would press the machines and it would come up with the Republican. And if they complained to the poll leader, they'd say, "We know where you work." To a lot of people of color, they were IDing people based on their looks then at polling places all over Florida. And I was parked there for months with the rest of my family. So that's what we're looking at also. The actual structural program that we all know the right has worked on, aligned with the PACs, aligned with the now elimination of what little PAC, I'm not going to call it separation, I'm losing my language, but race is so salient in this old slaveocracy. They keep pulling it out. The older I get, the sadder I get for obvious reasons. It's still salient. And unfortunately, it's a global phenomenon. That's what's most depressing. It's not just the United States. If it was just the United States, I'd just be ashamed of my own country. But
Right.
it's used everywhere.
Right, and I should add, people should pay attention to the influencers that are like Nate Friedman, but Nick Shirley in particular is quite interesting to watch the way he operates. He went down to, is it Quetta or I guess I'm maybe mispronouncing it.
But
Quetta, and in the middle of him doing his reportage, he is on Piers Morgan. He actually refers to replacement theory. That whole argument, which we know is a completely racist argument. But again, nothing of the nuances of how that issue occurred was mentioned in any kind of reporting I saw on Fox or any kind of feed I saw on some of these conservative platforms. But let me just, throw it to Shawn. You can take us out with your comments.
Well, there were a few things that I was going to kind of end on. Kind of thinking about Florida, kind of thinking about what we've kind of looked at, some of these Democratic primaries. An interesting one I think we have is so I think that hopefully your viewers know that Florida was gerrymandered in 2022. They re-gerrymandered it for this election, and it really affected a lot of the districts in southeastern Florida. So there's two of them that I find, so we're going to see this a week from Tuesday. One is that Congressman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's white, chose to run in a plurality Black district kind of around Fort Lauderdale. And I'll be interested to see how that comes out. because she's basically her seat got blown up. She could have run like in about an R+5 district, but she chose not to. It's more or less the district that I can't pronounce her name, that resigned basically because she was stealing COVID money, seat, kind of there in Broward County. And the other one is a seat where Democrats think that they actually have a chance at holding it. So they drew this kind of coastal district through southeastern Florida from Donald Trump would live in this district, by the way, kind of like the north part of Miami along the coast, which is actually has a lot more Republican lean than some of the more interior parts of those counties. It actually, Jared Moskowitz, who saw his seat blown up, decided to run here. I think Trump won it by 9, but Biden would have won it. So it had a big shift towards um, Republicans in 24. It also, I think that it's estimated that it has probably the largest percentage of Jewish Americans in the country. It would be right up there with a couple of the seats in New York City because a lot of the people that live in that district originally were from New York City and
My
decided to
mother and
return there.
mother-in-law's district is the most Jewish
Mm.
place in the Western Hemisphere in terms of ratio of Jews to the rest of the population in Palm
Mhm.
Beach County, further north. Lois Frankel has a primary, and hers, who was the former mayor of
Yeah.
Palm Beach and the incumbent Democratic congresswoman, and further
Mm.
north a little bit in Palm Beach County too, a Democratic primary.
Yeah. So what I was kind of getting at with the Moskowitz, I don't know if we call it the Moskowitz seat. It's more of an open seat, really. He actually faces a very progressive challenger. But it seems like that Jared Moskowitz is, if there's a Democrat that could win that seat, it's him. You know, he's somebody that has had a hit. He actually worked for Ron DeSantis, actually.
Really?
Yeah, he actually was the director of emergency management
Huh.
under Governor DeSantis, and has had a lot of crossover appeal in some of his races, as his seat, we thought of was just like uber democratic, to becoming like a lot more competitive. Um, actually, Governor DeSantis actually won his seat, the old version, back in 2022. Will Democrats stick with Congressman Moskowitz, or will they choose somebody that probably, I think his name is Larkin, Oliver Larkin, I think, somebody that may be ill-suited towards that seat. Because kind of as Jeffrey was saying earlier, kind of the more progressive, some being DSA people. The seats they have been kind of more focused on have been more safe Democratic seats. Um, Seats where, whoever wins the Democratic primary is almost certainly to be the winner. But this is a seat that, kind of zoomed right. And kind of the last thing, because I don't know, next time we might chat, the race that I think that is left that I am most interested in is actually in September. And that's Ed Markey has a really strong challenge from Congressman Seth Moulton. And this is kind of an interesting race because Markey actually is the much more progressive candidate, while Moulton has had a history of being much more moderate.
Hmm.
But this is a race that is much more generational. And I mean, literally, one of the things that Seth Moulton has said, what are some of the things you're worried about Ed Markey? That like he might die during the next 6 years. And, we can't afford to have the seat open because Massachusetts requires a special election. And, I think that there's kind of vibes of the Biden, should Joe Biden not have ran in 2024? And we're actually kind of seeing another generational thing in a seat in Connecticut around Hartford. Congressman John Larson, who some of your viewers might remember, had that incident on the House floor where he kind of like froze for kind of like a Mitch McConnell freeze, it kind of felt like, facing somebody that's not necessarily, so he's actually very progressive himself. Um, One of his bills actually wants to expand Social Security, which I think that most progressives would think that that's a great idea. But facing the former mayor of Hartford, who was much younger, so I think it's interesting that we see kind of in some deep blue areas there, where it's not necessarily ideology that we may see drive some of the primaries here. but more generational thing, thinking that we need some younger people.
The Dianne Feinstein and I guess Mitch McConnell examples.
No, yeah, absolutely. And the person you were talking about was Sheila Shafillis McCormick. She's a congresswoman who had to resign due to allegations of stealing $5 million in federal COVID money. Well, we'll
Yeah,
do
I
something.
didn't want to butcher her name. So
Yeah, right, exactly. No, I had to look it up. We'll do something after Labor Day, depending on your availability, Shawn and Jeffrey's, and hopefully we'll get some of his other colleagues from the Working Family Party. There's actually was a congressional candidate up here I was interested to talk with. I was going to get him on. He's running under the political party that's actually the subject of investigation by the House Ways and Means Committee right now with the People's Forum, and he's running against Richie Torres. And so I have no idea. He's obviously going to have a hell of a time in getting inroads, but he's certainly running on the issue of this DSA surprise to everybody, which again I think is overgeneralized. But anyway, I want to thank both Jeffrey and Shawn for joining us tonight. And it's always a great pleasure to hear you, Shawn and Jeffrey, do your thing together. And hopefully we can get some other people down the road and join in with us. So you all have a very good night.
Stay cool, everybody.
thank you.
Oh, yes.
Global
Stay
warming.
Wet.
Well, Shawn doesn't seem to have the same kind of crazy weather we have right now.
It's only about 90 here in southern Indiana, so
Well, it's
Balmy.
disgusting here in New York, but you'll find out when you get back to Buffalo. All right, take it easy. Bye-bye.
right.